The oldest living mind in the galaxy felt fear for the first time in 900,000 years, and it felt it because of a shape on a screen. The mind belonged to a creature named Severin, and Severin was an elder. That word meant something specific where Severin came from. It did not mean old in the way a stone is old. It meant old in the way the dark between stars is old. Old enough that whole civilizations had risen, learned to count, learned to pray, and gone quiet to dust, while Severin's people were still deciding whether the matter was worth a vote. The elder species called themselves the Vaughn. They did not measure their lives in years. They measured them in the slow turning of the spiral arm, in the births and deaths of suns. A single Vaughn could remember the galaxy before there were empires in it, before any of the younger races had words. They had outlasted everything. That was the whole of their pride and the whole of their method. They did not conquer. They waited. They let time do the work of armies. And time always worked. Severin had been an archivist for 3 of those slow ages. Severin's task was to record the end of things. When a younger race grew loud and reckless and began to spread across the stars, the Vaughn did not crush it. They simply touched its worlds with the withering, and then they waited, and Severin wrote down how long it took. Severin had recorded the unmaking of 410 species. Not one of them had lasted past the count the Vaughn assigned to it. Not one. So when the alarm woke the long Vaughn ship Throne of Patience from its drift, Severin expected another small ending to record. A young race, somewhere out near the cold edge, had been flagged for the withering 11 of Severin's ages ago. By every Vaughn law of time, that race should be dust by now. The file should be ready to close. Severin rose through the dark halls of the Throne of Patience toward the watch deck, moving slow the way the Vaughn always moved, certain the way the Vaughn were always certain. The watch deck was a great curved room, a full league across, and at its center floated the screen, and on the screen was the shape. It was a vessel. That much Severin understood at once, but the understanding stopped there, because the vessel did not behave the way a vessel behaves. It was a wall of gray metal. It was long the way a mountain ridge is long, and it was blunt at the front, with no grace to it at all, no curves, no light, no song. Every ship Severin had ever catalogued had been built to please the eye of the race that made it. The Vaughn built spirals. The races they ended built crystal and glass and singing alloy. This thing had been built to please nothing. It was a block. It was a slab. It had towers on its back that bristled with long barrels, and the barrels were aimed outward in every direction, and the whole of it was the color of old iron left in the rain. It was, Severin thought, the ugliest object in the universe, and it was driving straight toward the heart of Vaughn space at a speed that should have torn it apart. The watch deck was full of Vaughn, and the Vaughn were doing something Severin had never seen the Vaughn do. They were hurrying. An elder named Otha, who was older than Severin by a full age, turned from the screen with a slow horror moving through the long muscles of its face. 11 ages, Otha said. We touched that race 11 ages ago. We touched their homeworld with the withering. We watched the green go gray. We logged the count. 40 of our ages, we said. 40 ages, and they would be gone. Then they are gone, Severin said, by reflex, because that was the law. Whatever that is, it cannot be them. It is them, Otha said. The drive signature carries their first markings. We have the records. This thing was built by the race we ended, built after we ended them, built while their world was dying. Severin looked again at the gray slab on the screen, and a cold thing turned over in Severin's ancient chest. The Vaughn had a name for the race out on the cold edge. It was a careful name, a clinical name, the kind of name the archive used for things already counted as dead. But the race had a name for itself too, a short, rough sound, and the markings on the gray ship spelled that sound out plainly for anyone old enough to read the oldest scripts. The sound was human, and the humans, who were supposed to be dust, had built something and pointed it at the people who had tried to turn them into dust, and they were coming. Severin did not yet know the word the humans used for the gray slab in the dark. Severin would learn it soon, and Severin would never forget it, and Severin would carry it back across the whole galaxy until every Vaughn who still lived knew it too. The humans called it a battleship. There was only one of it. One gray wall against the oldest power that had ever existed. against a species that had buried 410 races without raising its voice. One ship against the patience of the Vaughn. The Vaughn were not afraid of one ship. The Vaughn had never been afraid of anything. But Severin stood on the watchdeck of the Throne of Patience and watched the ugly gray thing grow larger on the screen, and Severin, the keeper of endings, felt the first cold edge of a thought the Vaughn had no word for at all. The thought was this: we may have started counting the wrong thing. For a long while, the watchdeck of the Throne of Patience held no sound at all, except the slow breathing of the ship itself. The Vaughn did not speak quickly. Speaking quickly was a thing the young races did, all those short, hot lives crowding their words together, because they had so few hours to say them in. The Vaughn had time. A Vaughn thought could take a day to finish, and there was no shame in it. But now, on the watchdeck, the silence was not the old, comfortable silence of beings who had nothing to fear. It was the silence of beings who did not have a thought ready and did not know how to begin one. Severin had spent 3 ages in this archive. Severin knew the shape of every certainty the Vaughn owned, and Severin could feel, standing there, the certainties beginning to come loose one by one, the way old stones come loose from a wall, slowly, and then all at once. The first certainty was the count. The count had never been wrong. Severin pulled the human file from the deep archive and let it open across the air of the watchdeck, and there it was, written in Othi's own hand 11 ages ago. World seeded. Green confirmed graying. Estimated full unmaking. 40 ages. Race designation. The careful clinical Vaughn word for things already counted as dead. And under that, blank. Because no Vaughn had ever filled in the rest. No Vaughn had watched. The file simply stopped. The way every file in Severin's archive stopped. At the moment the Vaughn drifted away and left time to finish the writing. Time had not finished the writing. Time had been interrupted. "Read it again," Author said, and its voice was low. "The first markings. The drive signature. Read it to me again, archivist, and tell me I am wrong." Severin read it again. Severin was not wrong. The gray slab driving toward the heart of Vaughn space carried the first markings of the race the Vaughn had ended. The oldest scratchings of a young people who had only just learned to write when the withering came down on them. The humans had carried their very first letters across the galaxy, welded into the side of a warship, the way a people carries the thing it refuses to let die. There was a younger Vaughn on the watchdeck, a creature named Liss, who was barely into its first age, and had never seen anything the archive could not explain. Liss had been watching the gray ship grow on the screen, with the bright, fearless attention of a thing too young to know better, and now Liss spoke, and asked the question none of the elders wanted to ask. If the count was wrong about when they would die, Liss said, then what else was the count wrong about? No one answered. There was no answer. That was the whole horror of it. The Vaughn had built 900,000 years of certainty on a single foundation, which was that time was theirs, that the count could not be wrong, that a thing marked for ending was as good as ended the moment the mark went down, and a gray slab the length of a mountain ridge had just driven straight through that foundation, as if it were the dead gray fog of the withering, untouched, unhurried, and absolutely real. Severin moved closer to the screen and studied the human ship with the eye of an archivist, which is to say the eye of a thing trained to read the history of a vessel in its hull, and the more Severin looked, the stranger the story became. The long spite had not been built in peace. Every plate of it told that. There were sections of the hull that were clearly older than other sections, joined badly, as if the building had been done in a hurry, and then done again better when better was learned, and then done a third time when the third lesson came. The gray ship was not one design. It was 11 ages of designs, layered over one another, a record of a people teaching themselves shipbuilding, while the dust rose around their shipyards. And here was the thing that Severin could not stop looking at, the shipyards. The long spite had been built in orbit of a dying world, in stations that were themselves aging under the withering, by hands that were themselves running out of count. The humans had built their answer to the oldest power in the galaxy, with the gray already in their lungs. They had welded those rough seams knowing that they, the welders, would not live to see the ship finished. They had built it the way a tree drops a seed into poisoned ground, not for themselves, but for whoever came after, so that someone, someday, would carry the answer back. They knew they would die before it flew, Severin said aloud, and the watch deck went very still. The ones who started it, they knew. The count was running on them too, so they built it for the next ones, and the next ones built more of it, and died, and the next ones after that. 11 ages of the dying, each adding a plate, each welding a seam, each handing the half-built thing to the children before the dust took them. Otha stared at the gray ship on the screen, and something moved across its ancient face, slow and terrible. We never watched, Otha said. We marked the world and we drifted away and we never watched, and so we never saw them build it. For 11 ages they built the thing that would break us, in plain view, in the orbit of the world we murdered, and we did not see, because we had decided they were already over. The Count said they were over, Liz said quietly. The Count, Athe said, was a story we told ourselves so that we would not have to watch. And that, Severin would think later, much later, after everything, was the first true thing any Vaughn said on the day the certainty broke. The Count had never been about the young races at all. The Count had been about the Vaughn. It had let them end a world and look away, and call the looking away wisdom, and call the wisdom patience, and never once feel the weight of a single thing they killed. The gray ship grew larger on the screen. The barrels on its back swung slowly toward the throne of patience, every one of them, with the unhurried certainty of a thing that had crossed a galaxy and was in no rush now that it had arrived. The Vaughn had 900,000 years of certainty, and in the next few moments, they were going to learn exactly how much of it the humans had already taken apart. To understand why the Vaughn were so certain, you have to understand the withering, and to understand the withering, you have to understand what the Vaughn believed about time. The Vaughn believed time was on their side, not as a saying, as a tool. The withering was the oldest weapon in the galaxy, and it was the only weapon the Vaughn had ever needed, because it did not break things, it hurried them. When the Vaughn marked a world for ending, they did not send fleets. They seeded the world's air and water and soil with the withering, a thing that was not quite a poison, and not quite a machine, a thing that whispered to matter, and told it to be old, and matter, being obedient, listened. Crops grew, and then aged to gray powder in a single season. Stone cracked the way stone cracks after 10,000 winters. But in a month, living things felt their own days run out too fast, felt their bodies turn brittle, felt the count of their lives pour out through a hole they could not find. The withering did not kill, it aged. It poured 1,000 years into a single one, and let the years do what years do. A world touched by the withering had perhaps 40 Vaughn ages, before nothing was left but dust that had forgotten it was ever alive. The Vaughn would touch a world, log the count, and drift away to wait. They never watched the dying. There was no need. The count was the count. Time did not break its promises. The humans' homeworld had been a blue and green thing, loud with life, reaching out toward the stars with the eager, clumsy hands of a young race. The Vaughn had marked it for ending because it was spreading too fast and asking too many questions. Atha had been the one to seed it. Atha remembered the green going gray. Atha had logged the count and drifted away, certain, the way the Vaughn were always certain. What Atha had not done, because no Vaughn had ever needed to do it, was watch. So no Vaughn saw what the humans did with their 40 ages. The humans did not pour out. The humans did not go quiet. The humans, when they understood that their whole world was aging to dust around them, and that they could not stop it, did a thing the Vaughn would have called impossible, if any Vaughn had been there to see it. They got angry, and then they got to work. A young race watching its home die might pray, or weep, or fall to fighting itself. The humans did all of that, for a while, in the first terrible years. And then a stubborn fraction of them looked at the gray dust where their forests had been, looked up at the cold, patient stars from which the ending had come, and decided that if the universe was going to give them less time, they would spend every second of it building the thing that would carry their answer back. They had no 40 ages. They had decades, racing decades, with the dust rising and the count running. So they did not build something beautiful. They did not build something clever. They built something that would survive. They poured the dying ingenuity of a whole species into a single design, and the design was a wall of metal so thick and so blunt and so heavy that even the withering would take a long, long time to chew through it. They built it in the orbit of their dying world, in shipyards crusting over with gray decay, and they built it the only way a dying people can build anything, which is all at once and with everything they had left. When the Vaughn's count said the humans should already be dust, the humans were welding the last plates onto the back of a ship the length of a mountain ridge, and they were arguing about what to name it. They named it the Long Spite. That was the gray slab on Severin's screen. That was the ugliest object in the universe, driving toward the heart of Vaughn space, 11 ages after it should not have existed, and could not exist, and did anyway. On the watchdeck of the Throne of Patience, the Vaughn were trying to decide what to do, and they were discovering that they did not have procedures for this, because nothing had ever required a procedure before. We touch it with the withering, Othe said. As we touch the world, the hull is metal. Metal ages. We tell its iron to be old, and it crumbles, and that is the end of it. This was the obvious answer, and the Vaughn loved obvious answers, because obvious answers had never once failed them. So the Throne of Patience opened the long vents along its spiral flanks, and breathed the withering out into the dark, a wide gray cloud of patient unmaking, and the cloud drifted toward the long spite, and the Vaughn waited for the iron to remember it was old. Severin watched the gray cloud reach the gray ship, and nothing happened. The cloud washed over the blunt nose of the long spite, slid along its mountain ridge length, curled around its bristling towers, and where it touched, the metal did not crumble. It did not age. It did not so much as dull. Severin leaned close to the screen, and what Severin saw made no sense, because the humans had done a thing that should not have been possible for a young race to do. They had taken the very weapon that was killing them, and they had studied it. With their forests turning to powder and their oceans going still, they had collected the withering, learned how it whispered to matter, learned exactly how it told iron to be old, and then they had built their ship out of an alloy that could not hear the whisper. Every plate of the long spite had been forged to be deaf to the one weapon the Vaughn had ever needed. The humans had not run from the thing that was killing them. They had reverse-engineered it and wrapped themselves in the answer. That is not possible, Othe said. No race learns the withering. The withering is older than their whole species. It is older than their sun. They learned it while it was killing them, Severin said quietly. They had nothing else to study, so they studied that. The long spite did not slow. It came on through the dead gray cloud, as if the cloud were morning fog, and on the watchdeck, the Vaughn made a second decision, because the Vaughn always had a second answer. If time would not break the humans, the Vaughn would simply outlast them in another way. The Throne of Patience was the largest single object the Vaughn owned, a spiral cathedral of a ship 80 leagues across, grown over 4 ages out of living alloy and folded space. It did not carry weapons the way the human ship did, all those crude pointing barrels. The Vaughn did not need barrels. The Throne of Patience could fold a piece of space shut. It could take a volume of the dark the size of a moon and simply close it, the way you close a book, and anything inside that volume would find itself pressed into a point and forgotten. The Vaughn had ended battles this way before, in the rare ages when a race got loud enough to need ending fast. They folded the space the loud thing occupied, and the loud thing stopped occupying space, and that was that. So the Throne of Patience reached out across the dark with the slow certainty of 900,000 years, found the volume of space that held the long spite, and began to fold it shut. Severin felt the fold begin. Every Vaughn on the watchdeck felt it, a deep pressure behind the eyes, the universe itself bending to the will of the oldest species in it. The screen showed the space around the long spite starting to curve, starting to pinch, the stars behind it smearing as the dark closed like a fist. And the long spite fired its engines and drove forward into the closing fold, and refused to be pressed into a point. Severin did not understand, at first, how a ship could refuse. The fold was not a thing you fought with engines. The fold was the geometry of space itself deciding to be smaller. You could not outthrust geometry. But the humans had done their reverse engineering on more than the withering. In the long decades of building the long spite, with telescopes trained on the patient cold of Vaughn space, they had watched the Vaughn fold a smaller raider that wandered too close, and they had recorded it, and they had built into the spine of the long spite a thing they called, in their rough short tongue, the anchor. The anchor did not fight the fold. It declined the fold. It took the volume of space the long spite occupied, and it nailed that volume to the deeper structure underneath. The structure, even the Vaughn could not fold, and it said, in effect, this much space is ours, and it does not close. The fold reached the long spite, and broke around it like water around a post. On the watch deck of the Throne of Patience, an instrument that had not shown a fault in 4 ages, cracked down its length with a sound like a snapping bone. The recoil of a failed fold rang back through the great Vaughn ship, and the spiral cathedral shuddered, and 3 Vaughn on the far rim of the watchdeck were thrown to the deck for the first time in their unimaginably long lives. The oldest species in the galaxy had reached out with the 2 weapons that had never once failed in 900,000 years, and the ugly gray slab built by a race that was supposed to be dust had shrugged off both of them, and not even slowed down. Severin rose from the deck, slow and shaking, and looked at the screen, and saw that the long spite had crossed the last of the gap, and that the cold mouths of its forward barrels were now pointed directly at the Throne of Patience. The humans had spent the entire approach absorbing everything the Vaughn could do. Now it was their turn. The first salvo from the long spite was not large. It was 4 shells. The Vaughn saw them leave the barrels, 4 dense slugs of the same def alloy as the hull, accelerated to a speed that turned them into lines of light, and the Vaughn were not afraid, because the Vaughn had folded moons and ended 410 races, and what were 4 lumps of metal to that? The 4 lumps of metal struck the outer spiral of the Throne of Patience, and the living alloy of the Vaughn Cathedral, which had never been struck by anything, which had only ever been the thing that did the striking, came apart. It came apart the way a thing comes apart when it has never once needed to be strong. The Vaughn had built the Throne of Patience to be vast and old and beautiful and patient. They had never built it to be hit, because nothing had ever hit it. A whole outer spiral, 3 leagues of grown alloy in folded space, tore loose and tumbled into the dark, venting the warm fog of the Vaughn's living halls into the cold. Severin stared at the wound in the side of the oldest ship in the galaxy, and could not make the sight fit into any age of memory. There was no precedent. There was no count. The archive had no file for the day the Throne of Patience bled. Otha was speaking, and Otha's voice had a sound in it that no Vaughn voice had carried in 900,000 years. It was small. It was the sound of an old certainty cracking down its length like the broken instrument. They reverse-engineered the withering, Otha said. They reverse-engineered the fold. In 11 ages, in the dark, while they were dying, Othi turned its long, slow face to Severin. What did they do with the rest of the time? Severin did not answer, because Severin had just understood the answer, and the answer was terrible. The humans had been given 40 ages to die in. They had needed only 11 to build the long spite and cross the galaxy, which meant the humans had not spent 11 ages building one ship. They had spent 11 ages learning everything the Vaughn had ever done to them, and then learning how to undo it, and then learning how to repay it. The long spite was not the answer. The long spite was the messenger carrying the answer. And the message had just put a hole in the side of the oldest power that had ever existed, and the message was still firing. The hole in the side of the Throne of Patience did not stop bleeding for a long time. The Vaughn had no procedure for a wound, because they had never had a wound. Their ships were not built to be repaired in battle. They were built to be vast and old and patience does not bleed. So the warm fog of the living halls poured out into the cold dark from the torn outer spiral, and the Vaughn who tended those halls did not know what to do, because there was no age of memory that told them what to do, and Severin watched them drift in the broken corridors, not fleeing, not fighting, simply stunned, the way a being is stunned when a thing it knew to be impossible has just happened to it. The long spite did not press the wound. That was the first strange mercy, though the Vaughn did not understand it as mercy yet. The gray ship had fired 4 shells, torn 3 leagues off the oldest vessel in the galaxy, and then it had stopped. It hung in the dark, blunt and gray, and silent, with the warm wreckage of the Throne of Patience tumbling slowly between them, and it waited. It waited the way the Vaughn waited. That was the thing that unsettled Severin most. The gray slab built by the short hot race that crowded its words together and burned out its lives in a single hand of years was sitting in the dark with the unhurried patience of an elder, holding its fire, in no rush at all, as if it had all the time in the galaxy. As if it had learned patience from the Vaughn, the way it had learned the withering and the fold, and meant now to use that against them too. On the watch deck, Oath gathered itself, and the old certainty tried to reassert. It fired 4 shells, Oathie said. 4. Against the throne of patience. We have 40 cathedrals. It cannot have shells enough to wound 40 of us. The arithmetic does not allow it. It did not need shells enough to wound 40 of us, Severin said. It needed shells enough to wound 1 of us, in front of all of us, so that the other 39 would understand that we can be wounded. It is not spending shells, it is spending certainties, and it has a great many of those to take. Otha did not answer, because Otha knew it was true. Severin turned back to the screen and tried to think the way the humans must have thought. The Keeper of Endings had recorded 410 unmakings, and not one of those races had ever made Severin do this, had ever made Severin sit and try to crawl inside the mind of the thing that was supposed to be dead. But the gray ship demanded it. You could not understand the long spite by counting its shells. You could only understand it by understanding what it was for. And what it was for, Severin slowly realized, was not destruction. If the long spite had wanted to destroy the Vaughn, it had already shown it could. It had broken the withering, and broken the fold, and torn open the throne of patience with 4 shells. A thing that wanted destruction would not have stopped at 4. It would have kept firing until the spiral cathedral was a cloud of dead alloy. The long spite had stopped, which meant the long spite wanted something else. Something the Vaughn did not have a word for yet. Severin felt the cold edge of that thought again. The one from the beginning, the one with no Vaughn word. We may have started counting the wrong thing. The Council of Elders, scattered across the heart of Vaughn space in their spiral cathedrals, reached out to one another across the dark, and they argued, slowly, in the long, heavy way of the Vaughn. Some said to flee. The Vaughn could fold the dark and slip away into the deep drift where no young race could follow, and wait, and let the short lives of the humans run out, and return in an age when the gray ship was a derelict and its crew was dust. This was the oldest Vaughn answer of all. Outlast it. Time is on our side. But Liss, young Liss, who had asked the question no one wanted to answer, asked another one. How do you outlast a thing, Liss said, that built a ship to cross the galaxy while it was dying? They were already running out of time when they started, and they did it anyway. We cannot outlast a race that does not need to survive to win. They proved that on their own world. They are already proving it here. We could drift away for 10 ages and come back and find the gray ship still waiting, because waiting is exactly the thing they learned from us. And so the Vaughn did not flee, the Vaughn gathered, because gathering was the last weapon, and a power that has never lost always reaches, at the end, for the weapon it has not yet spent. They called in the war fleet. 40 cathedrals came up out of the deep drift, slow and enormous, spiral upon spiral of living alloy and folded space, and Severin watched them assemble across the path of the long spite and felt, for the last time, the old certainty try to stand. 40 folding mouths, the whole weight of 4 ages. Surely not even the gray ship could pass that. Otho spoke the old words, the words the Vaughn had spoken before every ending they had ever delivered, the words that meant the matter is decided, and time is on our side. And Severin, listening, understood that Otho was not speaking the words to the humans. Otho was speaking them to the Vaughn, to remind them of who they had always been, to hold the wall of certainty up one moment longer, because Otho could feel, as Severin could feel, that the moment the gray ship reached the gathered fleet, the wall was going to come down, and 900,000 years were going to come down with it. The long spite turned its blunt nose toward the wall of 40 cathedrals, and it opened its engines, and it came on. And it did not slow. The Vaughn had a council, and in the long ages of their power, that council had never once been convened in a hurry. It was convened in a hurry now. They reached across the dark to the other Vaughn ships, the slow spiral cathedrals drifting at the heart of their space, and they told them what was coming, and the other elders did not believe it, the way Severin had not believed it, until the long spite came over their own horizon of stars, and they saw the gray wall for themselves. The Vaughn decided to gather. This was their third answer, and it was the answer of every power that has never lost. If one ship could not stop the gray slab, than the whole weight of the elder species would. They called in their cathedrals from the deep drift, 40 of them, the entire war fleet of the Vaughn, every vessel they had built across 4 ages, and they formed a wall of folded space and living alloy across the path of the long spite, 80 leagues thick, a barrier the like of which had never been raised since the Vaughn first learned to fold the dark. Severin stood on the watchdeck of the Throne of Patience and watched the warfleet gather, and for a moment the old certainty came creeping back. 40 cathedrals, 40 folding mouths. No single thing in the galaxy could pass 40 Vaughn cathedrals. That was simply true. That had been true for 900,000 years. But Severin had learned, in the last hour, to look at the gray ship and ask a different question. Not what can it not pass. The new question was, what have the humans already seen us do, and what have they already built the answer to? And the answer, Severin understood with a slow, cold dread, was everything. The Vaughn had only ever had 3 weapons: the withering, which aged, the fold, which closed, and their numbers, which gathered. The humans had crossed the galaxy. The humans had watched the Vaughn the entire way. The humans had built the Longspite to be deaf to the first weapon and anchored against the second. There was no reason at all to believe they had not also built the answer to the third. The Longspite came on toward the wall of 40 cathedrals, and it did not slow, and the Vaughn reached out together, all 40 folding mouths at once, to close the dark around the gray ship from every side at the same instant, a thing no anchor could refuse, because it came from everywhere. The Longspite opened its spine. The humans had built one more thing into their ship, and they had saved it, and Severin would learn its rough human name later, and find that the humans had a grim sense of humor, because they called it the last word. The last word was not a weapon that struck a ship. It was a weapon that struck space. The humans had spent 11 ages learning how the Vaughn folded the dark, and somewhere in that long study, they had understood the thing the Vaughn themselves had forgotten across their endless certainty, which was that a fold is a wound in space, and a wound can be torn wider by something that does not care. The Longspite tore the fold wider. When the 40 cathedrals reached out to close the dark around the gray ship took the closing folds, all 40 of them, and instead of refusing them, it grabbed them and pulled. It dragged the 40 Vaughn folds together into one, and it twisted them, and it turned the greatest gathering of folding power in the history of the galaxy back upon the things that had made it. The dark closed, but it did not close around the Longspite. It closed around the wall of cathedrals. Severin watched from the watchdeck as the Vaughn warfleet, the entire warfleet, the whole patient weight of 4 ages of certainty, was caught in the fold it had cast and began to pinch shut. Severin saw stars smear behind the cathedrals. Severin saw the living alloy of the spiral ships begin to bend in ways living alloy was never meant to bend. And then the Longspite did the thing that Severin would carry across the galaxy, the thing that changed the whole meaning of the gray ship in Severin's ancient mind. The Longspite let go. It had the 40 cathedrals in the closing fist of their own fold. It could have closed the fist. It could have pressed the entire Elder Warfleet into a single forgotten point and ended the Vaughn the way the Vaughn had ended 410 races, with patience and certainty, and no voice raised at all. The humans had built the weapon. The humans had the moment. By every law of the withering, by every count in Severin's archive, the humans should have closed the fist. They opened it. The Longspite released the fold a breath before it closed, and the 40 cathedrals sprang back into their proper space, battered and bent and alive, and the gray ship drove on through the gap where the wall had been, untouched, unhurried, and absolutely deliberate. Severin did not understand. None of the Vaughn understood. The humans had been given a chance to end the species that had murdered their world, and they had let that chance go, on purpose, with the deliberate care of a thing that had decided exactly what it was doing. Why? The question rang through the watchdeck of the Throne of Patience, and it had no answer in any age of Vaughn memory, because the Vaughn had never spared anything. Sparing was not in the archive. Mercy was not a count. The Vaughn had a word for ending, and a word for waiting, and no word at all for the thing the gray ship had just done. Then the Longspite did something even stranger. It slowed. For the entire approach it had refused to slow for any weapon the Vaughn could raise. Now, having broken every weapon the Vaughn had, having held the whole elder species in its fist and chosen to open the fist, it slowed. And it came to a stop in the dark before the battered wall of cathedrals, the gray wall facing the spiral wall, and it did the one thing no race had ever done to the Vaughn. It spoke to them. The humans had built a voice into the long spite, and they had aimed it at the heart of Vaughn space, and across the cold dark, the oldest species in the galaxy heard the rough, short tongue of a race that was supposed to be dust, translated through 11 ages of careful study into a form the Vaughn could understand. The voice was not loud. Severin had braced for fury, for a cataloging of crimes, for the recitation of a murdered world. There was none of that. The voice was tired, and it was steady, and it was old in a way the humans had no right to be old, because they had only had 11 ages, and the Vaughn had had 900,000 years, and yet the voice on the long spite sounded older than Othe. It sounded like a thing that had spent its whole short life burying its own people, and had decided, somewhere in all that burying, exactly who it was going to be. The voice said a name. It said the captain of the long spite was a human called Edrin Voss, and that Edrin Voss spoke for a world the Vaughn had marked for ending, and that Edrin Voss had crossed the galaxy not to do to the Vaughn what the Vaughn had done to the humans. The voice said the humans had come to make the Vaughn watch. Severin did not understand, in that moment, what those words meant. Severin would understand soon. The understanding, when it came, would be the heaviest thing the Keeper of Endings had ever been asked to carry. But the first thing Severin felt, standing on the wounded watchdeck of the Throne of Patience, hearing the tired, steady voice of Edrin Voss cross the dark, was the strangest feeling of Severin's 3 ages of life. It was the feeling of being seen by something that should not have been able to see at all. The Vaughn had never been watched. The Vaughn watched. That was the whole of what they were. They touched a world and drifted away and never watched it die, because watching was for the things being ended, not for the elders doing the ending. And now a gray slab built by the dead was sitting in the heart of Vaughn space, having broken every Vaughn weapon and spared every Vaughn life, telling the oldest species in the galaxy that for the first time in 900,000 years, it was the Vaughn who were going to have to watch. The moment after the long spite opened its hand and let the 40 cathedrals spring back into their proper space, the dark was very quiet, and the quiet was the loudest thing Severin had ever heard. The Vaughn warfleet hung battered in the void. Every one of the 40 cathedrals bent and bruised by the fold it had been caught in, vents trailing warm fog, living alloy creaking back toward its proper shape. Not one of them was dead. That was the impossible part. The gray ship had held the entire warfleet of the Vaughn in the closing fist of their own folding power, the way you hold a single fruit. And it had decided, deliberately, with the full, clear intent of a thing that knew exactly what it was choosing, not to close the fist. Severin went back through the archive in its mind, all 3 ages of it, 410 endings, and could not find a single instance of anything sparing anything. The Vaughn did not spare. The races the Vaughn ended did not spare each other, in the brief loud wars they fought before the withering came for them all. Sparing was not in the archive. There was no file for it. There was no count for it. Mercy was a blank space in 900,000 years of records, and the gray ship had just written something in that blank space, in letters the Vaughn could not read. The Vaughn did not understand it, and what a Vaughn does not understand frightens it more than any weapon, because the Vaughn had built their whole greatness on understanding time, and here was a thing that time could not explain. It could have ended us, Othe said. Othe said it several times, slowly, the way a being repeats a thing it cannot make fit. It had the whole fleet. It had all 40. It could have closed the fold and we would be a point and a memory, the way we have made 410 races into points and memories, and it opened its hand. Yes, Severin said. Why? Othe said. And it was not the demanding why of an elder used to being answered. It was a small why. It was the why of a thing that has just learned, very late, that it does not understand the universe as well as it believed. Severin did not have the answer yet. Severin only had the question, and the question had teeth, because the question implied a thing the Vaughn had never once had to consider. If the gray ship could have ended them, and chose not to, then the gray ship wanted something the ending would have ruined. There was a purpose here, older and stranger than destruction, and the Vaughn, who had only ever understood destruction and waiting, had no instrument that could measure it. And then, the long spite slowed, and stopped, and spoke, and Severin heard the tired, steady voice of Edrin Voss cross the dark, and the first thing the human said after the name was not a threat, and was not a count of crimes. It was a question, and the question undid Severin more thoroughly than any shell. Did you ever wonder, the voice of Edrin Voss asked the oldest species in the galaxy, what it was like? Not the count, not the estimate, the thing itself. Did you ever, in 900,000 years, stop drifting away long enough to wonder what it was actually like for a world to feel its own days run out? The watchdeck of the throne of patience was silent. No Vaughn answered. Because the honest answer was no. The Vaughn had never wondered. Wondering required watching, and the whole genius of the Vaughn, the thing that had let them stay clean and certain and unbroken for 900,000 years, was that they had built a method that meant they never had to watch, and so never had to wonder. The voice did not gloat. That was the part Severin would carry hardest. A young race, a short, hot race that crowded its words together, would have gloated, would have raged, would have read out the long bill of the murdered world. Edrin Voss did none of it. The human just sounded tired and old, far older than 11 ages should have made a thing with such a short life, and the human said that the long spite had not come to make the Vaughn feel a count of pain. It had come to make the Vaughn feel the one thing they had spent everything to avoid feeling. It had come to make them watch. Send someone aboard, the voice of Edrin Voss said. Send your keeper of endings. Let the one who writes it down come and see the thing it has been writing down without ever once looking at, and then it will carry what it sees back to all of you, and you will not be able to unsee it, because that is the only weapon in this whole galaxy that you have never built a defense against. Not the withering, not the fold, not your numbers. You have armored yourselves against everything except being made to look. The voice went quiet. The gray ship hung in the dark, patient, blunt, waiting, having broken every weapon the Vaughn owned, and spared every Vaughn life, and asked, in return, only that one Vaughn come down and look. And the Council of Elders, the oldest minds in the galaxy, sat in the wreckage of their certainty, and discovered that they were afraid, not of the shells, they could have endured shells, they were afraid of the looking, because some old buried part of every Vaughn on every cathedral already knew what the Keeper of Endings would find aboard the gray ship, and already knew that once it was seen, it could never again be unseen, and that 900,000 years of never having to feel the weight of a single murdered world were about to end, in the span of one short human life, aboard the ugliest object in the universe. They sent Severin because they had to, and Severin went because, somewhere under 3 ages of clean, untroubled record-keeping, the Keeper of Endings had begun, at last, to want to know. The voice of Edrin Voss told the Vaughn to send someone aboard. This caused something close to panic in the Council of Elders, because the Vaughn did not go aboard things. The Vaughn were the thing you were brought before. Across 900,000 years, the direction of every meeting had run one way, the young races brought up out of the dark to stand small before the spiral cathedrals, and now a gray slab, the length of a mountain ridge, was asking the elders to come down to it, and the elders had no idea how to be the ones who came. In the end, they sent Severin. They sent Severin because Severin was the archivist, the Keeper of Endings, and if the humans were going to show the Vaughn something, then by the oldest law of the Vaughn it had to be recorded. Severin did not want to go. Severin went. A small Vaughn craft crossed the cold gap between the wounded spiral of the Throne of Patience and the gray wall of the Long Spite, and Severin rode it alone, and the closer Severin came, the larger the human ship grew, until it filled the whole of the dark, and Severin could see the welds. That was the thing Severin had not expected. The welds. Up close, the Long Spite was not smooth and was not beautiful, and made no attempt to be either. It was a thing that had been built fast and built hard by hands that did not have time to make it pretty. Every plate showed the rough seam where it had been joined. There were patches over the patches. There were scorch marks where the building had gone wrong and been done again. The whole gray wall of it was a record, written in welds, of a dying people refusing to die quietly. Severin had catalogued 410 species, and had never once been moved by any of them. Severin looked at the welds on the Long Spite, and felt something move in its ancient chest, that the archive had no word for. A door the size of a small world opened in the gray wall, and the Vaughn craft drifted in, and Severin stepped out onto the deck of a human battleship. It was warm inside, and it was loud, and it smelled of metal and oil, and the breath of living things. And everywhere Severin looked, there were humans. They were small. That was Severin's first thought. Each one was a tiny brief thing, a flicker, a creature that would live perhaps a single hand of years, and then be gone, less than nothing against a Vaughn age. They were soft. They were quick. They moved fast and spoke fast, and their lives ran out so fast that Severin could almost see the count pouring out of each of them as they stood there, and Severin understood, looking at them, why the Vaughn had never feared the young races. The young races were so short. The Vaughn had always simply waited, and the short things had always run out, and time had always won. Except these short things had crossed the galaxy. Severin walked among them, and the humans watched the elder with quick, wary eyes, but did not flinch from it. And Severin noticed a thing it could not stop noticing. The humans were not surprised by their own ship. They knew it the way a creature knows its own body. They touched the gray walls as they passed, ran a hand along a weld here, tightened a fitting there, the way you steady a thing you love, and have kept alive a long time. The long spite was not a weapon to them. It was an inheritance. Every plate of it had a name welded somewhere out of sight, Severin would learn later. The name of whoever had laid that plate and not lived to see the next. And the crew knew the names, and walked the corridors of their dead, the way the Vaughn walked the corridors of their archive, with care, with weight, with a kind of stubborn tenderness that the Keeper of Endings had no file for at all. And they were so few. That was the other thing. A ship the length of a mountain ridge, and Severin counted perhaps 400 of them aboard the whole gray wall. 400 small, quick lives rattling around inside a thing built for 10 times their number. The humans had not had 10 times their number to spare. They had built the long spite for a crew they did not have, because they had built it for a people they hoped would still exist, and then the dust had taken most of that people, and 400 had flown it across the galaxy anyway. 400 against 40 cathedrals, and 900,000 years, and they had not turned back. Severin passed a place where the humans had set their dead. It was a small quiet room near the heart of the ship, and in it were rows of small markers, each one a name and a span, and the spans were all short. All of them, none of them longer than a single hand of years. And Severin stood in the doorway, and understood that these were the ones who had died on the crossing. 11 ages was a long time even for the patient Vaughn. For the humans it was beyond counting. Generations had been born, and had grown, and had died inside the gray hull on the long way across the dark, never having seen the world they came from, never to see the place they were going, born to a journey, living a journey, dying a journey, and handing the ship onward to children who would do the same. The long spite had carried a whole small civilization across the galaxy, and most of that civilization was in this quiet room, under these short markers, and the 400 living had kept the room warm and clean and lit, because they did not look away from their dead, because looking away was the one thing this entire ship had crossed the galaxy to refuse. Severin, the Keeper of Endings, who had recorded the unmaking of 410 species, and never stood in a single one of their graves, stood in the small warm room of the human dead, and felt the something in its ancient chest grow, until it was almost too large to hold. Edrin Voss was waiting at the center of a great vaulted chamber inside the gray ship, and Edrin Voss was the oldest human aboard, which meant Edrin Voss had perhaps 30 of the human's tiny years left, a span so short that to Severin it was barely a breath. The human's hair had gone gray, not with the withering, but with the simple ordinary aging of a short life lived hard. There were lines on the human's face, there were scars on the human's hands, and the human looked up at the towering form of the elder, at a creature 900,000 years old, that had helped end 410 species, and the human was not afraid. "You came," Edrin Voss said. "Good. The others wouldn't have understood. Archivists understand." "You spared the fleet," Severin said. It was the only thing in Severin's mind. "You held all 40 cathedrals in the fold. You could have ended us. You let go. Why?" Edrin Voss was quiet for a moment, and then the human turned and walked, and Severin followed, and the human led the Keeper of Endings through the warm, loud belly of the long spite, past the small, quick humans at their stations, past the rough welds and the patched patches, into a long gallery deep in the gray ship's heart. The gallery was full of pictures. They were not pictures the way the Vaughn made pictures. They were flat and small and old, captured light, thousands of them, running the whole length of the gallery, and Severin walked slowly past them and understood that they were a world. They were the humans' world, the world the Vaughn had marked for ending. Here it was before the withering, blue and green and loud with life, oceans and forests and crowded shining cities. And here it was as the gray came, forests turning to powder, oceans going still and dull, cities cracking as their stone aged 1,000 years in a season. And here were the humans in the dying, small and quick and terrified, burying their dead, holding their children, looking up at the cold, patient stars from which the ending had come. 40 ages you gave us, Edrin Voss said quietly, walking the gallery. 40 ages to turn to dust. You touched our world, and you logged the count, and you drifted away, and you never watched. That's the part we couldn't understand, at first. Not that you killed us. Things kill things. But that you wouldn't even watch. You decided we were already over, and you looked away. The human stopped before a picture near the end of the gallery. It showed a small human child holding a fistful of the gray dust that had been a forest, looking up out of the flat captured light with an expression Severin had no word for. So we built the long spite, Edrin Voss said, and we crossed the galaxy. And do you know what we came for? We didn't come to age your worlds. We didn't come to fold you into dust. We had the weapon to do it. You felt it. I held your whole species in my hand, and I let go. The human turned and looked up at Severin with tired, steady eyes. We came so that you would have to do the one thing you never did to us. We came to make you watch. Severin stood in the gallery of the dying world and finally understood. And the understanding was the heaviest thing the Keeper of Endings had ever carried. The humans had not come for revenge. Revenge was a count, and the Vaughn understood counts, and the humans had refused the count. The humans had crossed the galaxy to do something the Vaughn had no defense against at all, because no Vaughn weapon could stop it, and no fold could close it, and no patience could outlast it. They had come to be seen. They had crossed the dark to stand in front of the species that had looked away while it murdered them, and they had broken every weapon that species owned. And then, with that species held helpless in their hand, they had refused to do to it what it had done to them. They had let go. And in letting go, they had made the Vaughn watch the whole of it, the dying world and the burying, and the gray dust in a child's hand, with no fold to hide behind, and no age to wait out, and no certainty left at all. The Vaughn had spent 900,000 years never having to watch. The humans had spent 11 ages making sure they finally would. You will tell them, Edrin Voss said. The other elders. You're the archivist. You'll carry it back. That's why we asked for you. We don't need you dead. We needed you to see. A species that learns to look away from what it kills can keep killing forever. So we made the looking away stop, starting with you. Severin looked at the gallery of the dying world, at the thousands of small, quick lives the Vaughn had logged as a count and never once watched end, and the Keeper of Endings, who had recorded the unmaking of 410 species without ever feeling a thing, felt the whole weight of all of them arrive at once. There is no word, Severin said, very slowly, in any of our ages, for what you have done here. I know, said Edrin Voss. That's the problem. We're going to teach you one. Severin stood in the gallery of the dying world for a long time, and the humans led it. They did not hurry the elder. They seemed to understand, in their quick, short way, that some things take a long while to land in a very old mind, and that the landing should not be rushed. The pictures went on and on. Severin had thought, at first, that it was looking at a record of an ending, the kind of record the archive held, clean and counted and complete. But the longer Severin walked the gallery, the more clearly it saw that this was not a record of an ending at all. It was a record of a refusal. Here, in one flat captured image, a crowd of humans had gathered in a dying city, under a sky gone the color of ash, and they were not weeping. They were building. They had hauled the still living machines of their world into a square, and they were teaching one another, frantically, in the time they had left, how those machines worked, passing the knowing hand to hand, child to child, so that nothing would be lost when the dust took the ones who knew it. Here, in another, a single human had climbed to the top of a tower that was visibly aging beneath its feet, cracking, crumbling, 1,000 years of weather pouring into a season, and the human had set up an instrument and aimed it at the cold, patient stars, and was watching the Vaughn, recording them, studying the very thing that was killing the world, because there was nothing else worth studying in the time that was left. Here, 1,000 small lights in the dark of a dying continent, and Severin understood after a moment that they were fires, and that each fire was a gathering, and that at each gathering, the humans were doing the one thing the Vaughn had counted on them never doing. They were refusing to go quiet. They were refusing to pour out. They were sitting in the ash of their world and deciding, fire by fire, gathering by gathering, that the answer would be built and carried, no matter how many of them the dust took before it flew. We argued about whether to even try, Edrin Voss said, walking slow beside the elder. The human did not look at the pictures. The human had seen them all 1,000 times. The human looked at Severin, watching the looking. There were a lot of us who said it was pointless. The math said we couldn't beat you. The math was right, in a way. We never did beat you. You're still here. 40 cathedrals, 900,000 years. We're 40 years from being dust ourselves, the whole species. What's left of us? The human shrugged, a small, quick human motion. So no, we couldn't win. But that was never the question. The question was whether we'd let you look away. Severin stopped before a picture it had passed and come back to, the one that would not let go of the Keeper of Endings. It was the child with the fistful of gray dust, looking up. Severin had thought, the first time, that the child was looking up at the dying sky. Now, looking longer, Severin saw that the child was not looking at the sky. The child was looking at the stars, at the cold, patient places between them, at the Vaughn. The child was looking at the thing that had done this, with an expression Severin had spent its whole long life never having to meet, and the expression was not hatred, and it was not fear, and that was what made it unbearable. The expression was a question. The child was asking the stars why they had not stayed to watch. That's my granddaughter's drawing of it, Edrin Voss said quietly. She didn't live to see the ship fly. Most of them didn't. 11 ages. Archivist. Do you know how many generations of us welded that hull and never saw the dark beyond our own dying sky? They built a ship to cross a galaxy they would never cross, to deliver a message to a species that had already decided they were dead. And the message wasn't kill them back. We had the weapon to kill you back. You felt it. I held all 40 of you in my hand. The human's tired eyes did not leave Severin's. The message was look at us. Look at what you did. You don't get to do this and look away. Not anymore. Not after today. Severin turned from the child and faced the small gray-haired human who spoke for a murdered world, and the Keeper of Endings, who had recorded the unmaking of 410 species without a single thing moving in its ancient chest, found that something was moving now, something enormous and slow, and overdue by 900,000 years, and that it had no name in any Vaughn age. All of them, Severin said, and its old voice was not steady. The 410. We never watched a single one. We marked the world and we logged the count and we drifted away. And there were galleries like this on every one of them, were there not? Children with dust in their hands. Fires in the dark. Refusals we never saw. 410 of them. And we watched none. And we called the not watching wisdom. Now you know, said Edrin Voss. That's all we came to do. Make one of you know. The rest is up to you. The word the humans taught the Vaughn was a small rough sound in their short tongue, and it did not translate cleanly into any Vaughn age, and the closest the archive could ever come was this. It meant to stay with a thing while it ends. It meant to refuse to look away. It meant that the dying of a thing is owed a witness, and that a power great enough to end a world is exactly the power most bound to watch it die. The Vaughn had no such word, because the Vaughn had never needed one. The Vaughn had built their entire greatness on the art of not watching. And Severin, standing in the gallery of the dying world aboard the gray battleship, understood that this was the true weapon the humans had carried across the galaxy, and that it was the only weapon the Vaughn could not defend against, because it did not break a ship or close a fold. It broke a certainty. And once a certainty is broken, no age of patience can mend it. Edrin Voss did not keep Severin long. The human had a short life, and did not waste its hours. Before Severin left the long spite, the human gave the elder one more thing, and it was the thing that mattered most. It was the cure. In 11 ages of studying the weapon that was killing them, the humans had not only learned to build hulls deaf to the withering, they had learned to undo it. They had learned how to whisper to aged matter and tell it to be young again, to coax the count back into a thing that had been hollowed out, to take gray dust that had forgotten it was alive and remind it. They had healed a corner of their own dying world this way, too late and too small to save it, but enough to know the cure was real. And they had brought it across the galaxy, the cure for the weapon the Vaughn had used to murder 410 species, and they were giving it to the Vaughn. "You ended 410 of us," Edrin Voss said, pressing the small case into the long hands of the Keeper of Endings. "Maybe some of those worlds aren't all the way gone yet. Maybe a few are still in their 40 ages, still turning to dust, still waiting for nobody to come and watch them die. You have the records, you know which ones. You're the archivist." The human's tired, steady eyes did not leave Severin's. "We can't reach them, our one ship, our short lives, but you can. You have 900,000 years and 40 cathedrals, and a list of everyone you ever wronged. So here's the cure, and here's the word. Go undo it, go watch, go stay with them." Severin took the case. Severin took the word, and Severin rode the small craft back across the cold dark to the wounded throne of patience, carrying both of them, and the gray wall of the long spite grew smaller behind, until it was once again only a shape in the dark, the ugliest object in the universe and the most important. The Council of Elders was waiting. They wanted to know what weapon the humans had shown Severin. They wanted to know the humans' plan, the humans' threat, the count the humans meant to take. They were ready, in the way of the Vaughn, to begin a war that would last 1,000 ages, and that they were certain, even now, even bleeding, they would eventually win, because they always won, because time was on their side. Severin told them there would be no war. Severin told them what was in the gallery of the dying world. Severin told them about the welds, and the patched patches, and the small, quick lives the Vaughn had logged and never watched. Severin told them the humans had held all 40 cathedrals in a closing fold, and had opened their hand. And then Severin taught the council the word, the small, rough human word for staying with a thing while it ends, and Severin watched the oldest certainty in the galaxy crack, not with a sound like a snapping bone this time, but with the slow quiet of something very old finally letting go. Because the Vaughn could not unhear the word. That was the thing. They could refuse the war. They could fold 1,000 human ships, if 1,000 human ships had ever come, which they did not. But they could not undo the knowing. The gray battleship had put a knowing inside the oldest species in the galaxy, and there is no patience long enough to outlast a knowing, and there is no fold deep enough to close one. The council did not take Severin's report well, at first, because the council was made of 900,000 years of certainty, and certainty does not yield in an hour. Othe was the one who fought it hardest, which surprised Severin, until Severin understood why. Othe had been the one to seed the human world. Othe had logged the count with its own hand. Of all the Vaughn, Othe had the most to lose by believing, because believing meant Othe had spent an age looking away from something it had a duty to watch, and an elder does not easily accept that the foundation of its long life was a way of not feeling. "It is a trick," Othe said, in the great slow hall where the council gathered. "The humans are short and clever and desperate, and they have built a clever, desperate thing, and now they send us pictures of grief to soften us, so that we will lower the withering and let them spread again. This is what the young races have always wanted, to spread. The whole reason we end them is that they spread, and ask too many questions, and reach too far. If we believe this, we abandon the only thing that has kept the galaxy quiet for 900,000 years. We abandon time itself." And Severin, who had stood in the gallery of the dying world, who had seen the child with the dust, who had heard the tired voice of a thing that had buried its own grandchildren to build a ship it would never fly, looked at Othe across the great slow hall and said the truest thing the Keeper of Endings had ever said. "You are right that it is the only thing that kept the galaxy quiet," Severin said. "But you have the word wrong, Othe. It did not keep the galaxy quiet. It kept us deaf. There is a difference. A galaxy is not quiet because there is no grief in it. A galaxy is quiet because we built a method that meant we never had to hear the grief. 410 times we made a world scream, and we folded the dark and drifted away before the sound could reach us, and we called the silence peace. It was not peace. It was distance. The humans crossed the distance. That is all they did. They crossed the distance we built so that we would never have to hear, and they made one of us hear, and now I have heard it, and I cannot make myself unhear it, and neither will any of you, once you let the pictures land. The hall was silent. Even the oldest of the elders, the ones who had been ancient when Severin was young, said nothing, because there was nothing in 900,000 years to say. Then Lys spoke, young Lys, into the silence, and asked the question that turned the council at last. "What does it cost us?" Lys said. "To look. That is all. The humans did not ask us to die. They held the whole fleet, and they let go. They did not ask us to surrender our cathedrals, or our folds, or our ages. They ask us to do one thing, to stop looking away. And we are standing here in a hall built to last forever, the longest-lived minds in the galaxy, terrified of the one thing a short race did without a single weapon. Why? What is it that we are so afraid of, that we would rather start a war we do not want than do the thing they asked?" Lys looked around the hall, from ancient face to ancient face. "I think we are afraid that if we look, we will have to change. And I think we have not changed in 900,000 years. And I think that is not wisdom. I think it is the longest anyone has ever managed to look away." And the council, which had ended 410 species, which had outlasted everything, which had never once in its unimaginable history been moved by anything, was moved by a creature barely into its first age, because the creature had said the thing they had all felt aboard the gray ship, and none of them had dared to say. Uthi was the last to yield. The elder stood a long time in the great hall after the others had begun, at last, to speak of the worlds, and the cure, and the records, and Severin went and stood beside it, the keeper of endings beside the keeper of the count that had broken. "I seeded their world," Oath said quietly, "with my own hand. I watched the green begin to gray, and then I drifted away, because that was the law, and I was certain. I have been certain for 900,000 years. I do not know how to be the other thing." "Neither do I," Severin said. "But I have the cure, and I have the records, and I have a word the humans taught me, and there are worlds still inside their 40 ages, still turning to dust, still waiting for nobody to come. We can learn the other thing on the way. We have time, Othe." Severin almost smiled, in the slow Vaughn way, at the bitter shape of it. "We have always had so much time. Let us, for once, spend it on the right thing." And Othe, after a long while, the longest while of its long life, bowed its ancient head and agreed. The Vaughn went to the worlds. It took them ages, of course. It always took the Vaughn ages, but the Vaughn had ages. They had nothing but ages, and for the first time in 900,000 years, they spent them on something other than waiting for things to die. Severin led them, because Severin had the records and the cure, and the word, and the keeper of endings became, in the slow turning of the spiral arm, something the Vaughn had never had before. A keeper of unendings. There were 410 of them on the list, 410 ended worlds, and Severin went through the archive world by world, and divided them into 2 columns, the way the humans had 2 columns in everything they did. In the first column were the worlds already gone, the ones whose 40 ages had run all the way out before the gray ship ever came, dust now, beyond any cure, beyond any staying. There was nothing to do for those, except the one thing the Vaughn had never done, which was to read each name aloud in the great slow hall, and let the council hear it and not look away. And so the council read all of them, every name, however long it took, and it took an age, and not one elder left the hall until the last name was spoken. In the second column were the worlds still inside their 40 ages, still turning gray, still holding people in their stone places, still capable of being brought back. There were not as many of those as Severin had hoped, but there were more than none. There were enough that the work would fill the rest of Severin's long life, and the lives of every Vaughn who came after. And the Vaughn, who had spent 900,000 years with more time than they knew what to do with, finally had a use for all of it. They found the worlds they had marked, the ones still inside their 40 ages, the ones still turning gray. And they did not drift away this time. They came down out of the dark in their spiral cathedrals, and they breathed the cure into the dying air, and they whispered to the aged matter and told it to be young again, and they watched. That was the part that mattered, the part the humans had crossed the galaxy to teach. They watched. They stayed. They were there when the green came back into the gray, when the count poured back into the hollowed-out things, when the small, quick lives that had been logged and abandoned looked up out of the dust and saw, for the first time, that someone had come. Severin stayed with each of them. Every world. Every return of the green. The Keeper of Endings stood on 1,000 reviving worlds and watched, and felt the weight of each one, and did not look away, because Severin had learned the word, and Severin would not be the thing that looked away ever again. The first world Severin brought back was the smallest one. It was a world Severin chose on purpose, a quiet gray thing, far out on the edge, a place the Vaughn had ended 6 ages ago, and logged and forgotten. By the count it had perhaps 3 ages left, before the last of it became dust. By the count, no one was supposed to be there at all. There were people there. Severin had not expected that, and the not expecting was its own quiet lesson. A scattering of them, the descendants of a race the Vaughn had marked, holding on in the gray ruin of their world, sheltering in the few stone places that had aged slowest, drinking from the few waters the withering had touched last. They had been dying for 6 ages, slowly, generation by generation, and they had kept on, the way the humans had kept on, because that is apparently the thing that living things do when you give them less time. They do not pour out, they dig in. Severin brought the cathedral down out of the dark, and the people on the gray world saw a spiral cathedral of the elders descend toward them, the very shape that had ended their world, and Severin could only imagine what they felt, watching the thing that had murdered them return. They must have thought it was the end at last, the finishing of the count. And then Severin breathed the cure into the air. It is a slow thing, a cure for the withering, slower than the withering itself, the way mending is always slower than breaking. Severin did not drift away after. That was the whole of the new thing, the thing the humans had crossed the galaxy to teach. Severin stayed. The Keeper of Endings brought the cathedral down low over the gray world and waited, ages if it took ages, and watched. And the green came back. It came back slowly, a thread of it here, a stain of it there, in the cracks of the gray, in the beds of the dead rivers. It came back the way a thing comes back, when it has been waiting a long time for permission, and the people of the small world came out of their stone places and stood in the returning green, and looked up at the spiral cathedral that had once ended them, and had now, impossibly, come back to stay and to undo. And Severin watched them through the eye of the archive, and recorded it, and this time the file did not stop at the moment of drifting away. This time the file kept going. This time the Keeper of Endings wrote down the return of the green, and the people in it, and did not look away. Othi was on a different world, far across the dark, doing the same thing, and across the gap between them, Othi sent Severin a single message, in the slow, heavy way of the Vaughn, and the message was not about the cure, or the count, or the records. It said only this: I have watched a forest grow back. I did not know it would feel like this. I do not have a word for what it feels like. Neither did Severin. The humans had given the Vaughn one word, the word for staying with a thing while it ends. They had not given the Vaughn a word for staying with a thing while it begins again, because the humans had not lived to need that word. So the Vaughn made one, slowly, across the ages, the first word the elder species had invented in 900,000 years, and they made it together, world by reviving world, and it became the most precious thing in their whole long archive, more precious than the count, more precious than the fold, more precious than time. It is a small word. It does not translate. The nearest the records can come is this. It means the keeping of a promise you did not know you owed, to a stranger you will never meet, made good in front of their children's children. It is the word the Vaughn say now, instead of the old certainties, when they bring a cathedral down over a gray world, and breathe the cure, and stay to watch the green return. It is the word Severin has said over more worlds than there are stars in the arm, and every time the Keeper of Endings says it, The Keeper of Endings thinks of a gray wall of welded metal driving out of the cold edge, deaf to the withering, anchored against the fold, holding the whole weight of the oldest power in the galaxy helpless in its hand, and choosing, deliberately, to open that hand, and to teach instead of to end. They never saw the long spite again. The humans had a short race and a wounded world, and they went home. The gray battleship dwindling back across the dark the way it had come, and whether it reached its dying world, Severin never learned. The humans did not ask for thanks. They had not come for thanks. They had come to make the looking away stop, and they had. And that was the whole of what they wanted, and a thing that wants only that, cannot be bought or threatened or outlasted. But Severin kept the word, and Severin kept one of the flat captured pictures, given quietly in the gallery before Severin left, the one of the small human child holding a fistful of gray dust and looking up. Severin carried it across every reviving world, and set it where the Keeper of Endings could see it, so that Severin would always remember who had taught the oldest species in the galaxy the thing it had refused to learn in 900,000 years. The Vaughn still tell the story, in their slow way, across the long turning of the ages. They do not tell it as a defeat, because the humans never asked to defeat them, and there was no defeat in it, only a knowing they did not have before. They tell it as the day the elder species met the gray metal horrors out of the cold edge, the blunt, ugly slabs welded by the dying, the things the short race called by a short, hard word. The Vaughn had outlasted everything. They had buried 410 species with patience and certainty, and never once raised their voice or watched a single one die. And then one ship came out of the dark, built by a race that was supposed to be dust, deaf to the weapon that aged worlds, anchored against the fold that closed them, and it broke every weapon the oldest power that had ever existed could raise, and held that power helpless in its hand, and chose to open its hand, and taught it a single word. There was only ever one of it, one gray wall against the whole patience of the Vaughn. It never fired a second salvo at a Vaughn life after the first. It never needed to. It had not come to take account. It had come to give one back. And 900,000 years of certainty had no answer for that at all. Severin is old now, even by the reckoning of the Vaughn, old enough to remember the galaxy before the gray ship came and after, and Severin has watched more returns of the green than there are stars in the arm, and Severin has stayed with every one. The Keeper of Endings became the Keeper of Unendings, and the archive that once held only the count of the dead now holds the count of the reborn, and it is a longer list, and it is still being written. When the young Vaughn come to Severin and ask about the day the certainty broke, Severin shows them the flat old picture of the child with the dust, and Severin teaches them the word, and Severin tells them the truth that the gray battleship carried across the whole galaxy to deliver. A power great enough to end a world, Severin tells them, is exactly the power most bound to watch it, and the day a species learns to look away from what it kills is the day it has already begun to lose, no matter how long it lives, no matter how many it buries, no matter how certain it is that time is on its side. Because somewhere out on the cold edge, Severin tells them, there was a small, quick race that was given 40 ages to turn to dust, and it did not turn to dust. It built a wall of gray metal and crossed the whole galaxy on a short and dying breath, and it came not to repay the ending, but to refuse it, and it taught the oldest mind that ever lived a single word it had spent 900,000 years never needing. The humans called the gray wall a battleship. The Vaughn, who have no word for defeat in this story because there was none, who keep the word the humans taught them, and the picture of the child, and the long-growing list of worlds brought back from the dust, have come, across the slow ages, to call it something else. They call it the day they learned to watch,